So the whole game is kind of stretches out my personal understanding of what it means to be a human being and how it has been evolving while I was making the game.
The anamorphic post-noir raccoon PI game Backbone has been out for a couple of months now and received a barrage of conflicting reviews. Many were in love with the game's style and overall themes, while others felt disappointed in what they expected from a Kickstarter campaign, then funded by publisher Raw Fury. It received wide promotion, being on Xbox Game Pass, but any glance at Steam's mixed reviews shows a divisive war zone of players trying to dissect this unique title. But what about the developers underneath all that chaos? The studio Eggnut were made up of many first-time game developers given a chance in the middle of one of the most challenging phases of many of our lives. I spoke to the game's writer and director Aleksandra Korabelnikova a couple of weeks after release in July to discuss the game's conception, Kickstarter, development, and troubled launch.
The idea for the game came from raccoons attacking Nikita, who's my co-founder, backyard in Vancouver. He scared them off with the trumpet, and we were on a video call during that time. He's like a musician, so he had a bunch of instruments, and he chose a trumpet. And we just couldn't stop laughing about playing a raccoon in a video game and like stealing trash strategically from people. And Nikita made this like 2D model of the main character, like a raccoon in a trench coat in a fedora. He placed him in Unreal Engine because that's the thing that he was familiar with, in 3D environment, but like pixel art assets and 2D assets and with 3D light. And so everything kind of stemmed from the idea of playing a raccoon and the art style that we wanted to develop. I was really into social studies at the time. Like I lived in Russia and was starting to kind of go through existential crisis of realizing these systemic issues in the society that I grew up in, like systemic sexism specifically affecting me on my everyday life. And I was really interested in kind of taking this very simple idea and very simple character and asking myself questions like, why is he a raccoon in a trench coat? Like, what kind of society is he a part of? And, you know, like building that lore around it. And the story and the narrative and the idea for the narrative kind of came from there. Like, we wanted to talk about what being a certain species means, what being a certain gender means in this society where everybody is an animal. And we made a trailer for Kickstarter, which is very unorthodox. Like people usually at that time, and I'm not sure about nowadays, but they make a playable demo. So it's more of a proof of concept. But we didn't really have time to make something playable. So we mostly wanted to pitch like the promise of the visual aesthetics and the vibe and everything else. So we made a trailer and we kind of built the game in the engine and shot it, like just the footage. So it wasn't anything that was really auctionably playable at the time when we did Kickstarter. And that kind of contributed into a lot of future issues and everything else. I don't regret it because it is, we are very lucky that like a bunch of nobodies who have never made games before and just thought, you know, like, let's try. We got funded for that first big chunk of prototyping for the first year of our studio, basically through Kickstarter. And I still feel like it's impossible to do that. And we're so lucky that we did, that the concept was strong enough for people to be compelled by it and to give us their money. During Kickstarter, it's very important to kind of present your vision as a team, and people mostly invest in you as a team, as a group of people, and as a group of personalities than in any specific project, because games take a very long time to make, and I think everybody understands that, and they can change in the course of development. And during Kickstarter era, it was still very underdeveloped. Like it was a very general idea. And the artifact, which is spoilers, kind of comes up in the last quarter of the final game. It was always this metaphor of like change and very strong internal change of a person who suddenly realizes how the world works. And It also worked with the idea of species, like it could change your species in the world where the qualities that you are discriminated against could change at any time. Like I could stop being perceived as a woman and I'm no longer discriminated on like the sexist basis. What is that world? What could that world look like if we had a technology to kind of change it and go that post-humanism route? So those metaphors and themes, I think they were there from the beginning, but the way that we kind of approach them while writing the plot, that is, in a nutshell, a detective plot, I think we discovered it step by step. And the last part of the game was written basically 3 months before release. It was just me kind of wrapping it up from the perspective of me as a person at that time. And the beginning was written by me as a person at that time, like 3 years ago. So the whole game is kind of stretches out my personal understanding of what it means to be a human being and how it has been evolving while I was making the game. Internal monologues of Artifact are just genuinely my therapy journals. Like I was just going through a very strong internal shift. At the time, at like the last 6 months of development, I was out of a very long-term relationship. I was living alone for the first time in my life. I was kind of going through therapy and trying to kind of come in terms with my own trauma from my past, kind of digging into it. And I think it really affected, like isolation really affected my understanding of self, and it shows in the game. And some people really didn't like that the ending was very nihilist, like it's very sad. But for me at the time, I felt like it couldn't be any other way, because this is what change feels like. It's grief. It's a monumental loss of self and finding new self through the process. And I think it works really well to give you that feeling that I experienced, that I think is very universal, and like we all go through this. And I didn't want the game to be sad. I just want it to be true, and relatable to people who struggle as well.
And that's a fixed ending. Everyone always ends that ending, and there's a lot of people saying, why aren't there more multiple endings? Why aren't there more choices to make in these scenarios? So my question was why did you choose that more linear path? Did you approach trying to do these multiple endings, narratives and branches, or was it always, this is how it starts, this is how it ends?
So this is something I'm very I don't really like talking about it, because it's like authorial intent doesn't really matter, in some cases. Like I'm a huge believer in the depth of the author, and me being an author and explaining to people why things are a certain way, kind of, does it ruin the experience or not? I don't know. I still don't know the answer to this question, but I can say that everything is intentional. And the fact that it starts off as a very classic noir detective, and the prologue that we published, like 2 years ago, 2019, it was made specifically to have that branching and illusion of choice, but you would always end up in the ending that is linear, and it would become less and less branching and more linear with the game progressing. And it is part of the theme and part of the message that we wanted to convey. It's like you might feel like you have a choice, and you do, in very small details of your life, and like how the way you treat people and the way you approach certain situations and the way how you decide what kind of person you are every single day. Like you can change that anytime, but in the end we all fucking die. And that's cool. Like that's what makes everything mean something, like we all end up in one place, one way or another, and it's a universal human experience. And ignoring it and like pretending that there is a choice, it's not true. Again, I was just approaching it from the position of like, is it honest or is it bullshit? Like we researched different approaches to dialogue choices, and we kind of landed somewhere in the Commander Shepard territory, where Howard has an established backstory and he's a person that already knows people in that universe, and he is not asking very basic questions about the world building that the players could ask, like, what is the wall, who is the shepherd? Like, he already knows about it because it's been with him since he was little. Just like I, growing up in Russia, would never ask who is Putin, because he's part of my life for like 3/4 of my entire life. I don't know life without him. So it wouldn't make sense, and he was just a blank slate, and he would be asking those questions, and like you could choose whether to learn that information or not. So, but at the same time, we wanted players to have that emotional agency of like hovering your mouse button over 2 different choices, or like even 3 choices, which is the norm in the game. You always have kind of 3 approaches, like you said, being a dick, being an empathetic person, or being silly, because jokes are very important in life. And like hovering that mouse button, and every type of choice you make, if you internalize it, it really feels like role-playing, and it really feels like you have a choice of what kind of person you want to be. And we used to call the game like empathy simulator, because every different character needs a different approach. And it doesn't mean that in the end you will not receive the information that you need as a detective, because we want to tell that story to you, and you need to receive specific information whatever you do, like in the investigation sense of it. But with people that really paid attention and like read everything and explored everything and went into it without expectations, I feel those like 2 points really made a difference, and they felt like they really connected to themes and characters of the game, more than if you just had an expectation like, oh, this is a choice-based game. You have 5 different weapons, and you can approach like a closed door in like 10 different ways. Like, you can sneak behind it, you can like unlock it, you can smash it, you can talk to somebody, like when you have a shit ton of approaches to different situations. Like, Backbone is not the game like this. It pretends to be in the first act because it needs to do it in order to nail the themes of the later acts, in my opinion at least.
Talk to me about that experience with you and your team, the reading the reviews and then reading comments and going through that experience.
Well, it felt like a sudden obliteration of expectation. It's very hard to describe the feeling. It's like you expect it to be a certain way, and then it's not. And it's kind of very funny to me that the players kind of had the same feeling going in. Like, they expected the game to be a certain way, and it wasn't. And instead of taking it for what it is, and like not even trying to appreciate it, but just like trying to understand their feelings towards it and why they felt the way they felt, they kind of like just take it for granted and say that they like hate it, don't like it, very disappointed. Like, the word disappointed was very strong in the reviews. And then for me, as a person who spent 5 years of my life making this, it was also like I was expecting it to go a certain way, and suddenly it didn't. And for like to take it as it is, and just feel through it, and feel through the loss of it, and feel through the loss of a potential life you could have led after release. It was a lot, and it still is a lot. Like, it's been a month, and I don't think I will recover emotionally from it for a long time. The team is doing really well. We flew everybody who was in Russia into one Russian city, and that's like a majority of our team. And they spend a lot of time together, and they had each other to kind of support each other. And their consensus is like, we made art, and it's absolutely normal that it is very, how do you call it? Like 50-50, like half of people love it and half of people hate it. And that's okay. And like, they messaged me like, don't worry about it. Like, there was a reason we trusted you for these years to do what you know how to do and like what you want to do. And you did. and it's great. So the team is doing really well. It's me who's a doubting, depressive mess at the moment, but that's also normal. That's human, you know?
And I was going to say games are quite collaborative as well. So you've got these 5 years. It's not like you're in this isolated bubble and they were in their isolated bubble. It's kind of a blend of making sure your direction and your writing mixes with the music and the art. So was that something that went into it as well about like, did the team feel like they also had this imprint and they were kind of all in it together? Because I feel like you had to have that collective vision together, right?
Yes, but also during development, we had issues with that. Like the script wasn't finalized in time, and we had several several periods where the art department wasn't sure what they need to be doing because the script wasn't clear enough yet, because it was a very long discovery process of what kind of story we want to tell, you know, like how specifically we want to tell it. That's why it took such a long time to make it. So there definitely, because we are an inexperienced team, it's our first game together as a studio, and we grew like from 6 people to 18 people, just, you know, like all those departmental relationships and understanding what needs to be done first and what needs to be done next in order for all of it to come together. And the fact that the game, as an experience, as you can kind of play it right now, it came together in the last like 2 weeks of development, which is absolutely horrible. And it's all due to the inexperience of us as a team. We just had a post-mortem meeting yesterday, actually, and we kind of went through, you know, those things that didn't go well, things that went well. And I think the greatest thing for me is that all of these are fixable and they're very transparent. And we are already working on the next project, and we are already doing a lot better with a lot less uncertainty in certain areas. But watching the game come together in those last months, it was magical, absolutely magical. And I'm just kind of looking into the future, and I'm very hopeful that we will do it again, and it will be much better, and easier and healthier, which is really important.
Yeah, and it can be quite unhealthy when it comes to comments and reviews on the internet. How much did you limit yourself when reviewing criticism and comments and from various places? Were you trying to block yourself from it at times, or were you just absorbing everything and all things?
Well, I think the team stopped reading everything like in a couple of days after release, which is great. I read everything for about 2 weeks every day. So I looked at sales numbers, I looked at every review. Then I stopped reading negative reviews because it was really like affecting my mental health. And now I'm not reading anything. And I think I understand really well. Like we analyzed it and like put it into Google tables and just really got to the bottom of what makes people leave a negative review, what makes people leave a positive review, and like all the things that people have been talking about in our Discord, very in-depth conversations about the story and gameplay and everything else. Like I have a very good understanding of what people thought, and it will help us in the future. But for me right now, there is no need to learn more because I think I know enough. And now I'm kind of in this self-preservation mode where I'm just focusing on what we're doing next more than this.
Do you view the game differently? Is there anything that you look back and go, yeah, actually, that is actually maybe how it could be viewed? Or like, do you view the themes differently? Do you view the mechanics differently?
Surprisingly, no. I still very strongly stand on my vision of the game, like it was from the beginning, how it evolved until the end. And like, of course, there are areas that could benefit from more interactivity and more gameplay, but also I think the lack of it works in a meta narrative of it really well in my head. So, but I have I have this author's view on it, and it's very different from a person who is just, you know, coming into it and doesn't know all the things that went into it from the authorial intent and perspective, and from everybody on the team. So it is just my opinion on it, and it doesn't really matter, you know. And I like it. I think it works well, and it works how we all intended it to work. And it doesn't mean that I'm blind to criticism. It just means that I still see it as my child and as my baby, and I think it's perfect as it is, like imperfect, with areas that are lacking, with areas that maybe needed more work. But it has that very visceral human pain of creation in it. And I love it a lot for that. We did implement the criticism and the feedback in our next project, which is also set in Backbone Universe. But we still do it our way. We still don't. There is always a choice, like, do you listen to the gamers and just make a product tailored to a specific audience? Or do you still make something that you like more than anybody else would? Like, do you make art or do you make a product? And I think all successful indie game companies kind of land somewhere in the middle. Now we have that luxury of really understanding our audience and what they thought and what they want and what they need and what they don't even know they need. And we also have very good understanding of what we want and what we need. And we can kind of, meet in the middle. But we will never make a product. It's just not who we are as a studio and as people. We still have to make art for ourselves first and foremost.